To dive into the first and most major flaw of the Avatar live-action series, it's something that's completely out of the control of the creators. And that's the fact that Netflix only gave the showrunner 8 episodes for season 1. The animated series is very fast-paced with 20 episodes, and most of them tell key stories. Obviously, you can't feature all of these adventures and cuts are inevitable, but only having 8 episodes is definitely not enough time to execute book 1 of Avatar The Last Airbender. Or actually, it's more like 7 episodes because every episode has 6 minutes of end credits, which adds up to 48 minutes over the season. So this leads to multiple major problems that really hurts the live-action series, and the first one is that in order to fit in all of these adventures, they essentially combine 2 to 3 per episode. This is honestly the only way to deal with this problem other than cutting out a lot of the story. However, it leads to most of these adventures being underdeveloped and having unsatisfactory arcs. It's in general more rushed, especially since the showrunner is even including episodes from season 2 into the first season like the Love Tunnel and Avatar Kyoshi. Initially, that may seem pretty questionable, but to be fair, there's not a lot of filler episodes in season 2, so importing some of those stories into season 1 makes partial sense. And before going into some of those shortcomings of combining all of these adventures together into a small amount of episodes, I actually think that some of these pairings were pretty good, like Aang going to Kyoshi Island with the goal of meeting Avatar Kyoshi. Before this in the show, it was mostly a coincidence because in that episode, Aang wanted to blow off some steam by riding some massive fishies. While in the live-action version, it's tighter story-wise and makes sense to make it a goal to go there specifically. I also thought that including Jet no Mashu and him trying to assassinate the mechanist because he was working with spies was a solid integration. Although it was questionable about how Jet was completely okay and also killing the king of Omashu, when initially it had more to do with civilian collateral damage in a Fire Nation village. But the vast majority of these story combinations either were slightly flawed, didn't work very well, or were drastically inferior to the animated show. Like the tracker June was just a quick plot device to capture Aang. Aang meeting Avatar Roku was extremely rushed, and completely lacked any tension, urgency, and stakes like the original. The spirits capturing people had barely any impact, because it was quickly brushed over. Katara and Sokka being captured by the face stealer gave that subplot some stakes, but it ultimately didn't really make sense as to why the spirit kept him alive for so long. Not to mention that conflict was solved with a MacGuffin instead of Aang overcoming the spirit. Like, there are a lot of different aspects that make these stories inferior because of how rushed they are. Which this doesn't bring into account the fact that the episodes are constantly cutting away to other subplots where characters are going through unrelated adventures. This in turn also makes some of these episodes feel disjointed. They're trying to juggle so much because a lot of these adventures are pretty essential to the overarching story, and when you only have 8 episodes, you sadly have to do this. Then another major flaw that comes about by combining all of these stories is that it fragments the main trio of Aang, Sokka, and Katara. A part of what made season 1 of the animated series so fun was the unbreakable bond that these kids were forming together. They were constantly having fun, they were learning to depend on each other, there was a bit of a romantic undercurrent which I assume is being done away with, and they in general got to know each other very well. However, in the live-action adaptation, most of the time they're split up on their own adventures, and this in turn robs the development between these characters. There is a small amount of character development between Team Avatar, but nowhere close to how much there was in the animated series. Hell, in episode 6, both Katara and Sokka have less than a minute of screen time, which is pretty insane considering that they're both main recurring characters, and they're absent for 12% of the show. I'd argue that the character development between this trio is one of the most important aspects of the series. And to me, that was kind of the charm and heart of the animated show. When you isolate each of the characters like Sokka dealing with the mechanist, Katara meeting Jet, and Aang hanging out with Bumi during the same episode, it takes all of the focus off of any background character development and puts it purely on the story. Which some of these subplots would be much better if all 3 characters were together, the main example being the King Bumi arc. In the animated show, King Bumi kind of comes off as a crazy and mysterious antagonist of sorts, in which he holds Katara and Sokka hostage, and Aang has to complete a set of challenges that in turn teaches him different lessons. The main reason why Sokka and Katara are integral in this story arc is that they add stakes to the story. Aang has to succeed or his friends will die. That, and it also has a great twist in the end, where King Bumi actually turns out to be Aang's friend before he froze away, and Katara and Sokka were never really in danger. While in the live-action show, Bumi's identity comes out right away, and Katara and Sokka are off doing their own thing, which makes the story very underwhelming. And they essentially retold the story by having Bumi teach Aang that the world is tough and you have to make hard choices. Then Katara and Sokka conveniently show up at the very end to save the day. So in comparison to the animated series, it's largely a downgrade. Or there's even the issue of the new showrunner completely misunderstanding the point of some of these stories. Like the Secret Tunnel developed the character relationship between Katara and Aang, and Sokka also had a funny juxtaposed relationship with the singers that had some satisfying humor. While in the live-action series, the story feels a lot more shoehorned in, and it seems like the creators had no place for it in Season 2, but they wanted to include it in Season 1. Another major example is Aang's primary reason of going to the Northern Water Tribe to learn waterbending. In the live-action show, they mostly change it to where Aang gets a vision that the Northern Water Tribe is going to get attacked, and they have to go there and prevent it. Instead of, going there to learn waterbending? Or at the very least, having the crucial development between Katara and Aang, in which he teaches him the basics of waterbending.
You should be practicing too. The Avatar needs to master all 4 elements.
Maybe later.
Like, it's absolutely insane that Aang doesn't waterbend a single time in the entirety of Season 1. That's the entire point of the first season. It's just mind-boggling to me that this low-hanging fruit for character development and skill development was skipped over, and they just had Katara learning waterbending on her own off-screen. I was fine with the change of Katara not getting the waterbending scroll from pirates, and it came from her grandmother, but it's wild that Aang doesn't have any drive to actually learn it. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they start Season 2 where Aang learns waterbending from Katara off-screen. I really hope I'm wrong, but due to how fast and rushed the development of the show is, that could be a reality. So from all of these flaws, it leads me to think that this is the main reason as to why the original showrunners left the show. If you didn't know, the original creators of the animated series were going to be the showrunners for the live-action adaptation. Then suddenly, there were big delays, and there were quote-unquote creative differences. So if I had to guess, they probably refused to tell the first season of Avatar in a middling 8 episodes. And this is pretty funny coming from Netflix, who made $5 billion of net income during the year of 2023 alone. So it's pretty sad that they couldn't spare more episodes because, to me, to properly tell the story you need at least 12 episodes. Also, surely they'd be able to justify more episodes because of how popular The Last Airbender is as an IP. Instead, it comes across as Netflix not really caring about the actual quality and just want to milk the franchise for more money. And before moving on, I know I've been very negative towards the live-action show so far, but it's not a terrible adaptation. It's largely mediocre, and is especially worse to me since I literally just rewatched the animated show, and it's fresh in my mind. Also, the new showrunner does make some good changes here and there, like General Iroh having some new scenes with Aang, fleshing out Iroh and Zuko's backstory some more, seeing the Fire Nation destroy the Air Nomads, and Suki and Sokka's relationship being more developed. However, for each of these good changes, it's immediately counterbalanced by multiple bad changes that hurts the story in different ways. That, and since they're adding in new material into an already short time period to tell Season 1, it in turn compromises different aspects about the original show, since the time is even more cramped. Let's go into the next big issue, which is the direction in which the creators take the main characters. Before diving into the abyss of issues of the main trio, I think Zuko and General Iroh are pretty much flawless. It is hard to get over the legendary voice work of animated Iroh, but I think Paul Lee, who plays the live-action version, still does a great job. The relationship between Zuko and Iroh is strongly intact, and I think the extra backstory they give their duo makes their relationship even stronger. Iroh is my favorite character in the animated series, and he thankfully is perfectly adapted. And then that's pretty much the end of the good side, because the 3 main characters are pretty rough. Firstly, for Aang, since the creators are rushing the story so much, it feels like they leave out a lot of the childness and childlike activities that defines Aang. One of the biggest examples is in the first episode where, instead of the writers establishing Aang's camaraderie with his friends through an actual scene, they instead just tell us this information through Aang delivering a monologue to Appa.
I like to play airball and eat banana cakes and goof off with my friends. That's who I am.
This essentially breaks the rule of show don't tell, and the writers are primarily breaking this rule to save time. Along with Aang running away being a big part of his character in the animated series because he was angry and afraid of being separated from all of his friends. He deeply regrets doing this, and it constantly haunts him throughout the entire show. While here, he just coincidentally goes on a joyride and crashes into the ocean at the exact time the air temple gets raided. If this change was to remain, it would make more sense if Aang was actually there during the raid, but he was forced to abandon his people to stay alive. The survivor guilt would thus be more significant because Aang decided to go along with leaving behind everyone, instead of it being by accident. So these two crucial aspects about Aang are poorly executed and thus make him inferior to his animated counterparts. The core being of his character is still mostly intact and doesn't hinder the show's quality that much. Next in the trio we have Sokka. For Sokka, he essentially feels like he's starting out as his season 3 more mature self, when instead, he should be starting out more childlike and immature. I know in the animated series he can be a bit relentless and annoying at times, but you can definitely downplay that to a certain degree so it's not overwhelming. However, in the live-action series, Sokka starts out way too mature, and he's just brooding a lot of the time, which brooding is never a word I'd associate with a character like Sokka. He's supposed to be a person in the group that constantly brings levity and is always upbeat with his humor, and over time, he slowly turns into more of an adult. So I'm not sure how his character is going to technically progress if he's already starting out at his endpoint, besides him becoming a more competent warrior. Then lastly for the trio we have Katara. Out of the trio, I think she was hurt the most, because her main function within the first season was to help and teach Aang how to waterbend, while that's just not a thing in the live-action version. So this essentially deletes a lot of her potential character development with Aang. And then the bigger issue to me is that her personality feels significantly more muted. She comes across as such a bland character in the live-action show, and her animated counterpart feels like a drastically different character. There, she was a deeply passionate, caring, outspoken, driven, and mother-like character, and here, all of those characteristics are either not developed enough or are mostly downplayed. This may also have to do with the acting, which is another entirely different issue. Child actors in general can be very hit or miss, and normally, some child actors like the actor who plays Aang can overact at times. And by overact, I mean he can exaggerate his emotions in a lot of his scenes, when instead, a lot of moments for acting tend to call for more subtlety and nuance. As an example, I think Bella Ramsey, despite her shockingly being 20 years old now, was one of the best child actors I've ever seen. Through Lyanna Mormont in Ellie, she conveyed so much detailed emotional range, and conveyed a meticulous nuance that was shockingly better than most adult actors. While in the Avatar live-action series, I don't think most of these child actors are able to carry the immense weight that these characters require, along with the creators largely removing the childlike nature of these characters, which I think these actors would have an easier time portraying. So if they want to make the show more mature, then casting actors who are slightly older who can more naturally deliver that would make more sense. They do kind of do this with Sokka and Zuko, who are both in their 20s, and I think their age helps the acting for the characters they portray. I wouldn't classify them as being great by any means, but they do get the job done. So this kind of creates a disparity between the younger and older actors in terms of quality of acting. For Katara, I do wish they casted someone older for the character since she's supposed to be the mom of the group. However, she can't really play into that since she's naturally much younger than Sokka's actor. Then for Aang, you obviously can't cast anyone older, and even then, if they don't make seasons 2 and 3 really fast, they're going to have a Stranger Things conundrum where the kids are turning into fully fledged adults. It would be really weird if by season 3, Aang is like 20 years old. Outside of the main characters, there's one villain character that I think was kind of butchered, and that was Azula. It's hard to judge her since she hasn't had a lot of scenes yet, so I won't discuss her acting ability, but I don't think Azula's live-action version will come anywhere near as being as menacing as her animated counterparts, because fundamentally, it's hard for someone who resembles a child to command a lot of fear, despite the actress who plays her being 21 years old. In the animated show, she seems much older than what she technically is. Because of this, she constantly exudes an extreme aura of menacing energy through every line she delivers. In the live-action show, I have a hard time believing she'll come close to that, but hopefully I'm wrong. So overall, it's kind of unfortunate that the acting isn't that satisfactory because the main value that a live-action adaptation can have over an older animated series is the fact that you can communicate more complex emotions. Animating faces that communicate extreme nuances is really difficult, especially back when the original show was made. So I was kind of looking forward to that being a major improvement, and unfortunately, I was let down. Then finally, we have the show's production value, which is both amazing and bad at the same time. To go into the glaring positives, we have the VFX. All of the elements look outstanding and are always photorealistic. In particular, I love the opening scene of the show where this earthbender was fighting firebenders. The rock work looked amazing, and the blue directional light and the highlights on the rocks in particular made them look perfect. Along with the character interacting with the rocks by running up them, which also cements them as feeling real. But yeah, literally everyone has applauded how great the VFX in the show is, and through the final episode you can really see that most of the budget probably went to the VFX. Like that massive spirit water kaiju fight was flawless, and actually blew away my expectations. Then the production value takes a nosedive because the vast majority of scenes in the show take place on the volume. And the reason why this is a negative is because of two things. Firstly, every Water Tribe scene was filmed on the volume, and none of the production was actually filmed in a more Arctic climate. This in turn makes the setting feel fake for a multitude of different reasons. When characters are breathing, none of them have frosted breath, which to me is a massive oversight because that sells how cold the environment is. When that's jarringly missing, it immediately takes away from the realism of this world. I know this is a fantasy world that is fictitious, but fantasies in general want to sell you on that world actually being real. Like Game of Thrones is constantly filming in real and grounded environments, and even a newer show like The Rings of Power properly sells how cold the environment is. Then another aspect that sells the cold environment is how your face reacts to the cold. Generally in these cold environments, your lips crack and become chapped very easily, and your cheeks are constantly red. While in Avatar The Last Airbender, the actors seem like they're in a warmer climate, and they don't portray any of these signs. So it's kind of contradictory and can be very distracting. This is especially worse since a Netflix movie that takes place in a very cold environment just came out called Society of the Snow. In that movie, the makeup and overall look of the actors was incredibly realistic. Then when you go back to Avatar, you can see how fake and cheap looking the show is. The authenticity of this world is completely lacking, which this is probably a combination of the director not focusing on this and Netflix not wanting to actually film on location. Like, I find it a hard time believing that they spent so much money on the VFX and they couldn't simply add in fake frosted breath. And to be fair, if they don't want to film in a very cold environment, I can understand that, but they use the volume all the time. It's really easy to tell if they're using the volume because they try to hide the background out of focus, and it constantly creates this cheap, shallow depth of field look. And if you ever focus on the background, the resolution can be noticeable at times, along with the lighting feeling off in some scenes since it can be hard to match the realistic lighting of the environment. This especially feels even more noticeable because they do actually film in some real villages and jungles, so it makes the difference between these real environments and the fake ones stick out even more. Another shortcoming of using the volume excessively is that you can only work with a very small set. This can lead to the scale and size of scenes feeling small and not very dynamic. And sometimes it can even feel claustrophobic. One example is during episode 7 where Katara meets with the Water Tribeman Aang in this great hall, and you can clearly tell the set is only a couple tables. It feels really cheap, and the cinematography in turn is constantly being limited to just singles of the actors with the background out of focus. This over-reliance on the volume makes it feel like Netflix is trying to cheap out of shooting on location and building real sets. You can argue that you can't feasibly shoot on location, which is true for some of these places, like the Northern Water Tribe, but for a place like Omashu, you can definitely find a real location and then use VFX set extensions to add in the unrealistic buildings. Just like in King's Landing or Minas Tirith, other fantasy properties were either able to find real locations to integrate into their fantasy worlds or built great sets. This drastically makes the world feel real and believable, and helps immerse the audience into the story. While in The Last Airbender, I felt like I was constantly being ripped out of the world from the fake-looking surroundings. This also isn't to say that the volume is bad, because when it's used correctly with great ambiance, lighting, special effects, and cinematography, it can be seamless like in House of the Dragon. However, if you start to overly rely on it, it can become very noticeable and break your immersion. Then one more quick aspect about the production design are the costumes. I've seen a lot of people complain about it, and I mostly agree that it feels too clean and new. It gives off this aura of cosplay wardrobes where the costumes don't feel lived in. Overall though, I'm not that upset with how the live-action adaptation of The Last Airbender turned out, because the current showrunner, Albert Kim, was dealt a losing hand by Netflix by only giving him 8 episodes, and I admire him for taking the challenge when the original creators bailed for good reason. There's some good aspects here and there, although it's mostly overshadowed by the abundant flaws with the story's execution. It could technically be much worse, but that's not necessarily a good thing. The directing in general along with the acting is pretty lacking, and the production value besides the VFX was very disappointing. I wish this adaptation turned out to be as fun as the One Piece adaptation. But yeah, since the animated version of Avatar The Last Airbender is just significantly better, is more fleshed out, and contains more story beats, there's not much reason to watch the live action version over the animated series. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Patreon, and Discord links are in the description. As always, thank you immensely to my top patron, Logan Farmer.